Hi, I'm Luminaria Star, and this is a Metaphysician's Journal. Hi, today we are celebrating the life of Sybil Leek. Sybil Leek was an English witch, an astrologer, a psychic, and an occult author who wrote numerous books on occult and esoteric subjects. Dubbed Britain's most famous witch by the BBC, she was a colorful character in her time. She was born on this day, 22nd of February, but accounts differ as to whether she was born in 1917 or 1922. Her funeral card says 1917. And she was born in Normacott, Stoke-on-Trent, Staffordshire, to a well-to-do family with a long tradition of witchcraft, which they claimed could be traced back to a 16th century ancestor, and possibly even further back to the 12th century in southern Ireland. She also had a Russian grandmother who was psychic. She was a memorable and flamboyant woman with a distinctive personal style. Her trademarks were a cape, an heirloom crystal necklace, a loose flowing dress, and pet jackdaw named Mr. Hotfoot Jackson, who perched on her shoulders. From an early age she lived and grew up in the New Forest area of Hampshire, a region steeped in folklore and witchcraft associations. Her immediate family all played a part in encouraging her to follow the craft. She learned about nature, animals, the power of herbs, and Eastern philosophies from her father. And she learned astrology, the psychic arts, and divination from her Russian grandmother. She had little orthodox schooling, but many notable persons were regular visitors to the family home, including H.G. Wells, T.E. Lawrence, also known as Lawrence of Arabia, Dame Edith Sitwell, Thomas Hardy, and Aleister Crowley. In her book Diary of a Witch, Leek praised Crowley's conduct while he was a guest at their home, saying that he always behaved with respect toward her, all family members, and other concurrent guests, and that he was a delightful conversationalist and very appreciative of all courtesies and considerations that he was shown. At the age of 16, Sybil met a prominent concert pianist and soon afterward married him. He was 24 years her senior. They toured and traveled around England and Europe for a time, but he died just 2 years after the marriage, and Sybil returned home to her grandmother's house. Shortly after, she was sent by her grandmother to stay with a French coven in the hills above Nice. Eventually she returned to England, but after a short time staying with an acquaintance in Lyndhurst in the New Forest, she went to live with a group of Romany gypsies. She lived with the gypsies for over a year, learning more about the forest and animal communication, ancient folklore, and the practical use of herbs. During this time she also attended rituals of the Horsa Coven in the New Forest, which they claimed had existed for over 700 years. For a short time she served as their high priestess, and was therefore a member of the 9 Covens Council. During this time she was also a practicing numerologist and astrologer, and wrote that she foresaw the charismatic success of an obscure French captain named Charles de Gaulle, and predicted the literary achievements and death of Ian Fleming years before he set Agent 007 to paper. Later her family also moved to the New Forest area, and Sybil opened up an antique shop in the heart of the New Forest at Burley, as well as another at Ringwood, and yet another at Somerset, and although she refused to sell anything to do with witchcraft, she was very successful. At some point she met and married a man called Brian, and together they had 2 sons, Stephen and Julian, who are reported to have inherited the family's psychic gifts. Soon after the Fraudulent Mediums Act was revoked in 1951, she was walking in the woods and had a vision which made her realize that her purpose in life was to promote the craft and the old religion, and she began to do just that. At first people thought she was a fraud or a bit of a joke, but gradually they began to take a more serious interest, and into the 1960s her reputation as a psychic, astrologer, and witch began to attract attention, and as media interest in witchcraft grew, Leek found herself constantly being pestered by news reporters and tourists who traveled to Burley to see her. She claimed that she had to create decoys in order to be able to attend secret coven meetings for fear of being pursued by cameramen. Eventually her landlord refused to renew her lease, and she took this as a sign that she should take advantage of an American publisher's offer to come to the U.S. to speak about her book, A Shop in the High Street, on American TV. This was her opportunity to spread the word in America, where the Witchcraft Revival was just getting started. While in New York, she was contacted by Hans Holzer, a parapsychologist, who invited her to join him in investigating psychic phenomena. They went on to do numerous TV and radio programs on the subject, and then, finding the New York weather depressing, she moved to Los Angeles, where she met Israel Regardie, Aleister Crowley's old secretary and biographer, who was also an authority on Kabbalah and ritual magic. They spent much of their time together reminiscing about Crowley and discussing and practicing Golden Dawn rituals. In later years she moved to Melbourne, Florida, and divided her time between there and her work base in Houston. She continued to promote her craft, and her reputation gradually grew until she was touring frequently and giving lectures throughout the United States as well as in England and Europe. In her lifetime, Ms. Leek wrote over 60 books, 38 of which are discussed on various entries in Goodreads. Always strong in her defense of her beliefs, Leek sometimes differed and even quarreled with other witches. For instance, she disapproved of nudity in rituals, a requirement in some traditions, and she was strongly against the use of drugs. She was also at odds with many other witches in that she did believe in cursing under certain circumstances. She was also one of the first of the modern-day witches to take up environmental causes. There is still some controversy concerned with some of her anecdotes and claims. One of her longtime students, Christine Jones, says that she fabricated some of the accounts of her life experiences and caused considerable harm to the witchcraft movement in doing so. But all those things that could be verified has usually turned out to be true, with the possible exception of the claim to have been born in 1922 rather than 1917, which may have been an error either on the internet or in an English newspaper, but it might also have been a fib. Many ladies of that era did make themselves seem to be a bit younger than they were in fact. Now the antique shops have been verified. The New Forest covens have turned out to have a basis in fact and have been documented by several other sources. Her association with Israel Regardie is a matter of public record, and he apparently verified her accounts of Crowley's visits. It is known that her father associated with Crowley, so it's not much of a stretch to think that she must have met him during his frequent visits. Crowley would have not known her by the surname Leek, as that was a married name. Other names she went by have been kept private for the sake of family members. As for her association with English gypsies, children and grandchildren of the Rom gypsies she spent time with in her youth still remember anecdotes about her time spent with them and refer to her as the red-headed lady. And it's also a matter of record that she did receive medals at the conclusion of World War II for her service with the Red Cross. So it seems that she didn't invent the most important things, at least. She was truly a pioneer, regardless of what we may think of her. She was a key figure in the Witchcraft Revival of the 60s and 70s, and not only was she one of the first to see a relationship between the old religion and environmentalism, she was also a defender of gay people and their right to participate in pagan spirituality at a time when many covens were much less open-minded about this issue. She wrote at length about many traditions that considered homosexuality to be acceptable and even a mark of the spiritually gifted person. She also made it clear in her writings and interviews that she considered racism to be inappropriate and disgusting, since it was among the peoples of the more remote regions and third world countries that the ancestral magics of the world had survived the longest. She wrote fervently of reverence for the Mother Goddess and her belief that women were the equals of men, deserving equality in all areas of life, and due the respect befitting any person's cherished mother, grandmother, sister, or daughter. Sibyl Leek died of cancer in her Melbourne, Florida home on the 26th of October in 1982. And Ms. Leek shares this birthday with several other persons of interest. On this day in 1732, George Washington, who was the first official president of the United States, was born in Virginia. In 1788, Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, was born in Danzig, which at times has been part of Poland and other times has been part of Germany. In 1810, Frédéric Chopin, Polish pianist and composer, was born in Zelasawa Wola, near Warsaw, Poland. In 1892, Edna St. Vincent Millay, American poet and playwright, was born in Rockland, Maine. In 1925, Edward Gorey, the American illustrator and poet, was born in Chicago, Illinois. In 1962, Steve Irwin, Australian zoologist and television host, was born in Essendon, Victoria, Australia. And on this day, in 1987, artist Andy Warhol died, as did Papa John Creech, violin virtuoso, in 1994. Papa John Creech, you may remember, played with Jefferson Airplane, also when it was Starship, Hot Tuna, the San Francisco All-Stars, and The Dinosaur. He was also a frequent guest performer with the Grateful Dead and Charlie Daniels Band. And on this day in history, in 1855, the Pennsylvania State University was founded in State College, Pennsylvania. It was then called the Farmers High School of Pennsylvania. In 1924, U.S. President Calvin Coolidge became the first president to deliver a radio broadcast from the White House. And in 1997, in Rosslyn, Scotland, scientists announced that an adult sheep named Dolly had been successfully cloned. And that concludes this edition of the Metaphysician's Journal. Blessed be.